Okay. Tell me the first question again. Okay. So everybody here believes that God created you, right? Okay. And based on the fact that God created every single one of us, He created us pretty similarly, both biologically, emotionally, psychologically. The needs are very similar. At the same time, there are a lot of variations, right? God created you with something called intelligence. God created you with something called emotions, psyche. God created you with something called the spirit, right? All of these different facets we have to really be attuned to. Unfortunately, excuse me, I don't mean to say unfortunately, what happens a lot of times in the religious setting, especially in church, there's so much emphasis on the spirit, which is good. We do need to make sure that we nourish ourselves and nurture ourselves spiritually. That's why we read the Bible, we pray, we make sure that we fellowship with other Christians. These are all great things, but that's not all we are. We are physical human beings. We are emotional human beings. We have psychological well-being and psychological disorders. These are real things that God made us with. So we have to pay attention to them. When we are talking about things like depression and mental health and anxiety and other mental health disorders, they are both biological and emotional illnesses. And we have to pay attention to them rather than ignoring them or making it a spiritual problem, because it's not. If you have a heart attack, you have a problem with your heart. If you have an anxiety disorder, you have a problem with your emotional well-being. They usually, or I should say, they can happen without anything being wrong with your spiritual life. Okay? So the Christian perspective of constantly emphasizing the spiritual well-being, that has to align with your emotional well-being and your physical well-being and your psychological overall well-being. You're not just one thing. You're not just a spiritual being. You're also a physical being, emotional being, and you have to make sure that you're constantly connecting to yourself in all these different parts. Human beings are really complicated. We have a lot of different layers to us. And make sure that you are well overall. And what's the second question?
With that one?
Sure. There were a lot of questions on that one.
Yes. But I think in general, it just referred to kind of having a Christian perspective on the different roots of it, and I think you kind of answered that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Does anybody have a problem with what I just said, or is there something that you think differently? Oh, I'm sorry. I thought there was anybody have a different feedback? Oh, yes.
I do agree with you what you're saying in terms of how body and soul are all related and so forth. But Jesus does talk about anxiety a lot,
Mm-hmm.
and he doesn't attack it from a very physical perspective, but he attacks it from a very spiritual
Mm-hmm.
perspective. So I guess my question is, the gospel does affect, it cures our sins. It is the remedy for our sins. And so how does the gospel affect into your counseling and for Christians
Mm-hmm.
in terms of dealing with anxiety?
So we have to take into perspective, we have to make sure that we understand the historical continuity of what we know as both the gospel as well as medicine, right? Where the truth that we learn from the gospel being the only person who can cure us is our faith in Christ. True? However, medically speaking, we know far more now than Jesus did, even in the first century, about what happens to the human brain when there is an increased amount of cortisol, the stress hormones, as well as other malfunctioning of the brain. As in, he didn't have an MRI, he did not have a CAT scan, he did not have other electromagnetic machines with which we can assess our brains, right? So it's not just the faith in Jesus that's going to heal you of anxiety. guaranteed, if a person stays isolated with their own thoughts, especially when they're negative, and they do not share, and they stay in that persistent anxious mode with constant worries and fear that accompanies it, they're not going to get well. It doesn't matter how much of a Christian you are, you're not going to get well. Does that make sense? So it has to be kind of both, where your faith in Christ hopefully will increase your fellowship with other Christians, right? And this is kind of probably a very simplistic, like, one thing follows another in a very logical pattern. Life is not that simple, I understand. But the idea is, if you are in fact increasing your fellowship because you are following along with the Christian doctrine of you're supposed to be in God's family together and share a life together, then hopefully by being more open, and again, this goes so directly against the Confucius philosophy, it's really hard to fight that cultural norm, especially for Korean Americans. But you do need to open up if you want to make sure that you don't suffer from anxiety disorder and depression, especially major depressive disorder. Because the first thing a person's going to do when they suffer from these disorders, they isolate so much because there's such a high level of shame that we produce in and of ourselves, and also just the cultural norm in Korean American culture really promotes keep it to yourself. Does that make sense? Did that help? Okay. Anything else?
Yeah, I have a lot more questions here. I'm just going to do it whoever texted me first, and then if you want to ask Dr. Gill later. If we recognize someone we care about with symptoms of depression/anxiety, how should we approach them?
Ask them what they need. Let them tell you what they need. You don't have to have all the answers. You don't have to know what to do, because you don't. We have no idea. I have no idea what my husband needs. I have to ask him, and he needs to tell me. This communication has to happen. If he doesn't tell me, I cannot know. Same thing with, vice versa. If you observe somebody to be depressed and you have a good relationship with them to begin with, ask them, hey, these are some of my observations. What can I do for you? What do you need? And open it up so that the person is able to share. Please don't go and say, I see that you're depressed, you need to do A, B, and C. Because you have no idea. And that is something that you do have to accept. Just as a matter of fact, that's how life works. You don't know what anybody else is thinking, and you have no idea what anybody else needs, especially in case of depression. Because there's so much that lies underneath a person's depression, things like trauma.
My friend has been diagnosed with depression/bipolar disorder and extreme anxiety. Her doctor recommends medication, but her mom is against it, saying that the Christian thing to do is just to rely on God. Is this true? And if not, what steps should my friend take if her mother won't support her to get the help she needs?
This probably goes back to that question of, our faith in Christ is going to cure us of anxiety. It won't. And for this friend, she needs medical attention. If she has depression, anxiety, and bipolar disorder symptoms, then there's really the only way you're going to be able to effectively have any kind of talk therapy that's going to be helpful. We have to make sure that the hormones are balanced first. If there's a chemical imbalance to begin with, we have to make sure that that's balanced out first through medical attention, and then we're able to bring in more of the relational aspect and the talk therapy that will be helpful. I mean, it's like when somebody tells you to drink out of a fire hose, are you going to be able to do that? And reasonably expect somebody to be able to do that? It's the same thing. When there's a neurological imbalance, the person feels so out of control. They cannot think rationally. They cannot think emotionally. Their brain literally has stopped functioning. So we have to make sure that we pay attention to it both chemically, medically, and relationally. So for that friend, I really hope that despite her mom's maybe resistance to medical attention, she is able to get some medical attention.
The next question is panic disorder something that you have to deal with for the rest of your life once you've had an episode? Is it ongoing like depression?
It tends to be, that's a good question. It tends to be long lasting because what happens is, you are constantly training your body to function at its optimal level, right? So when you when you eat well, when you're exercising, when you're kind of living while managing your stress, then you are literally training your body and mind to stay at that status, stay at that healthy level, right? So it's really important that you live a healthy life because you're literally training your body to stay healthy. What happens when a person has panic attack because there's been a buildup of anxiety, you have now trained your body a new skill. You have now trained your body to endure so much anxiety. I mean, the body has to work very, very hard to suppress the amount of anxiety that it endures. But if you don't do anything to help it, your body has now learned a new skill to live with anxiety. And when you have a panic attack, now your body has learned, okay, this is how you have a panic attack. And that skill is very difficult to unlearn because now your body is constantly on alert, looking for that to happen. And by looking for it to happen, you're going to make it happen. So it is, once a person experiences panic disorder, they almost always have to go to therapy and to really talk through management of their anxiety and panic.
Since everyone goes through some level of depression in their life, when is it time to go seek professional help? Is there a breaking point?
When you're finding that activities of daily living, and these are simple things like waking up on time, taking a shower, taking care of your personal hygiene, maintaining your friendships, making sure that you attend your classes to pass your classes, making sure that you are, having a acceptable or active social life. These are very basic needs for every human being. If these activities of daily living are not getting taken care of, then that's when you need to go get some professional help. So for an example, kind of like what we read about what depression feels like for a person. It's like, I brushed my hair today, yay me, that's awesome. If a person is at that level of functioning or malfunctioning in life, they definitely need professional help. But that is, obviously a kind of a result of continued accumulated neglect over how they've been feeling. So they might have been feeling like I'm experiencing less energy, I feel really lethargic, I'm totally unmotivated, I'm not happy about anything. At that point, this is why self-awareness is really important. You always have to ask yourself, how am I doing today? Because when you are able to, at the beginning stage of feeling those symptoms, you're able to address it with somebody, with a therapist or a psychologist, it's so much easier to turn that around rather than getting to the point where you're celebrating brushing your own hair.
Is going through the process the only way to deal with trauma? If so, how do you go through the process? How do you unlock the brain for someone else?
Going through the process, meaning a person who has experienced extreme trauma has to revisit the trauma. That's really one of the only ways to unlock the brain, to literally flush it out. Nobody can do this, nobody should do this on their own, because something called re-traumatization happens on their own. So that's why we have people like psychologists and therapists and psychiatrists who are there to support the person, to even say, okay, it's enough for today. Like, let's not talk about it anymore. I don't want you to think about it anymore. I don't want you to talk to anybody anymore. At least give yourself a month. It has to be very regulated. Processing through trauma is an extremely difficult work. Very, very hard. So the person needs a lot of support. So that's why professional helpers like therapists exist, because that's their job, to assess the person in their relationship to trauma, know how much they can take before it's way too much, where it's re-traumatizing. So this process of working through trauma, please make sure that you have a person who can help professionally.
So I have symptoms. Should I seek professional diagnosis or just take steps to treat it? Why is a diagnosis important?
Diagnosis is important because it gives a pretty good framework for what you're dealing with. Is it necessary? Not really. It's not necessary, but it gives a pretty good framework to understand what you're going through. So the only way to get a diagnosis, I mean, anybody who's not licensed is not going to be able to diagnose you. But the idea is a person who's been diagnosed has seen so many people with the same pattern of recognizing the similar symptomologies that they're able to say, okay, these symptoms all point to this one diagnosis. Also, too, once you have a diagnosis, then you can have other professionals who can look at the same diagnosis, and when there's an enough agreement, you can have the confidence that is the problem and this is the way we can address it and bring about a solution, right? So because a person, for example, if they end up going to see, I don't know, 3 or 4 different therapists, because in the beginning it's like whenever you're looking for anything that you're wanting, you have to go shopping. You have to go from one doctor to another. Nobody ever goes to the first dentist and stays with that dentist, right? You kind of go to different dentists to see which one you like better, because they're not all good, right? Same thing with therapists. So when you go to see therapists for different consultations and you tell them your story and you find that after seeing 5 therapists, they're all kind of telling you the same thing, that's what the problem is. If there is that high of an agreement, that's what the problem is. So it cuts that level of confusion and it cuts that level of doubt. The question of, is this really what I have, right? So that's how diagnosis can be helpful. Is it necessary? As I said, no, but it is very helpful in that way.
It sounds like it's not something that I should be doing. I asked that question.
It's you.
Yeah, it seems like it's definitely above my pay grade. But just to help me, so I'm not going to try to do it. I'm not going to try to help someone who lives in trauma. Just to kind of help me understand, like, what is that? So is it just going through that process that helps them? And then is that all that is done through that process? It's just kind of me living it? And I don't know.
You mean dealing with the trauma process? Yeah, because what's happening is something that is unseen, which is the neurological reorganization. Your brain is constantly on. It has to be, right? If you're alive. If it's not on, you're dead. So your brain is constantly wiring and rewiring and rewiring and rewiring, even as you and I are talking about this right now. So what happens when a person is going through the processing of the trauma, the brain is rewiring and organizing, and you are changing your perception of the trauma. And when the reorganization happens, something called the emotional part of the brain, there are a lot of different medical terminologies to describe this part of the brain, but kind of just to simplify it, we call it the emotional part of the brain versus the rational part of the brain. You've heard of the left brain and right brain. The emotional part of the brain reorganizes itself. So you literally feel different. There is this cathartic experience. Almost every single one of my clients tell me that they experience after a therapy session. They feel lighter. They feel better. They feel like they dumped something. It's like something is off of them. Because the brain has literally gone, and it's nothing that I've done. The brain has literally gone through a reorganization process where it's able to understand what's going on with them. It's able to understand this is normal. It's able to understand that it was indeed a trauma, and it was horrible. Does that make sense? So this is why the revisiting of the experience in a very controlled and a very safe way is so important, because literally your brain has to connect back to your body so that you are a whole person. And in order for that to happen, there needs to be a lot of reorganization that happens in the brain. And this connection of the body and the mind and body is so important, and it's one of the things I'm really sorry to say, in Korean culture they don't believe in it. You know, it's like if you feel pain, you're supposed to ignore it. Don't feel pain. Just suck it up, and you know, don't tell anybody about it. That's a way to really hurt yourself more than anything else. I mean, why wouldn't you listen to pains in your body? But again, the Confucius ideology is you're supposed to tough through, like just, you know, be tougher than the pain and push through it. That's to really disconnect your brain and your body, where your brain doesn't listen to the pains in the body. But in therapy and in psychology, you have to connect. And the body has to listen to the brain, and the brain has to listen to the body. When that happens, and there's a real integration that happens, then really and truly people are in a better state of well-being.
And I'm assuming you asked that question because you probably see a lot of people with trauma. And if I can just add, healthy relationships are really important when people are going through trauma. They need your support. They need people. They need relationships. So be a good friend. Just be there for them while they're going through something difficult like this. Yeah, that's my 2 cents. Next question is how can we talk about strategies to protect a positive mindset?
Okay. That's a good question. Can I have the next slide? So there are 18 traits of emotionally intelligent people. And I think this is really good, something good to keep in mind. And 18 is a lot. And after a while, it's going to all sound the same. But I'm sorry, can you repeat the question again?
Strategies to protect a positive mindset.
Okay. So these are some of the strategies to make sure that you're staying in a more positive end of the spectrum emotionally rather than the negative end of the spectrum. There's a lot of negativity that we have to encounter every single day. And it's a real fight to say, nope, instead of thinking negatively, I want to really choose to think more positively. Think about more possibilities and think about how I can really play a part in making things go right. And really remembering for yourself things that are going right for you, things that you really are just grateful for, okay? So some of these traits, and this was published in Time Magazine, so I thought it's pretty legit, so I decided to share it with you. You have a robust emotional vocabulary, and this is something that I would suggest. You know, you can Google it, words that describe emotions, and learn it. So when somebody asks you, how are you doing? You don't just end the conversation with, good, fine. I have a little 5-year-old, that's the way he talks. How was school? Good. What did you do? Nothing. Well, do you want to eat? No. It's just like this one word, because his level of emotional intelligence is very shallow. He's only 5. But if that's not developed, you're, number one, not going to be able to connect to yourself in an emotional way. You're not going to know what these feelings are. You have to put a name to things, both thoughts and feelings, in order to understand them. So look at emotional words. So instead of saying, you know, fine, you might be able to say, I am feeling, you know, really, I don't know, rather buoyant in my spirit today. Right? Or, you know, describe the feeling in such a way where you are able to connect to yourself. You're not doing this you're not doing this for anybody else. You're doing this for you. Because you want to check with yourself about, yeah, this is how I'm feeling. So having those vocabulary words are very important, especially when you want to check with yourself and be aware of what's going on for you. 2, be curious about other people. We have so many different people. Ask questions. Hey, what's going on with you? Try to make that connection. Because the relationships are very important, particularly when it comes to helping and dealing with mental illnesses. Now, after I said that, when you ask a friend, hey, do you want to hang out? And the person says, no, I don't want to hang out today. Come on, I think you need to hang out a little bit more because I see that you're not feeling very good. It's like, no, I really just don't want to hang out today. Maybe tomorrow. Leave them alone, okay? Again, that person knows what he or she needs, right? And let them know that, hey, I am available to you. Call me anytime. If you want to hang out the next minute, I'm here. If you can just be available in that way, you're doing an amazing job of maintaining that, strengthening that relationship. Okay? But be curious about other people. There's a whole lot more people around you than just yourself. Embrace change. That's the only constant thing in life. When a person resists change, it's going to cause problems because life is going to force change on them. But if you can learn to accept it and even invite it, it tends to be much easier. Change is scary, granted. Talk to somebody. Talk to somebody about that fear and why that fear's been instilled. Okay? You know your strengths and weaknesses. Everybody's got strengths and weaknesses. But please don't favor your strengths and despise your weakness. That's not the point. You have to really strengthen your strength because it's great that you have those strengths, but please protect your weaknesses. Protect it with other people's help. If you're not particularly good at something, let another person know so that they can support you, they can help you. In such way, you can utilize the entire capacity with which God made you. Okay? Please do not despise or neglect your weaknesses. It's a part of who you are. It's a very special part. Okay? You are a good judge of character. This kind of goes with number 7. You know how to say no to yourself and others. People who tends to not be very good judge of character because they don't have those emotional vocabulary and they don't have the practice of understanding themselves and therefore other people, they tend to be very bad at saying no to other people because it tends to be there's no kind of filtering out. Is this what this person is, the way they're presenting themselves to me, is that appropriate? Is that okay for me? Or is this kind of unacceptable? Without making those judgments, you are always going to say, yeah, whatever you want. And when that happens, emotionally, you're going to really suffer because it's going to totally drain you completely. Okay? So be a good judge of character, yours first, and other people's. I jumped to 7. Know how to say no to people. When you can't do something, say no. Sorry guys, but it's not going to happen right now. And that's okay. If other people choose to turn away from you because you say no, that's their problem. It's not yours. Okay? You are difficult to offend. Why? Because you are comfortable with yourself. You understand why you are the way you are. You understand why you feel the way you feel, and you're okay with where you are. And so you're really difficult to offend because the person who really has that healthy relationship with him or herself, when you criticize them or when you judge them on something, they know that, that's not my problem, but that seems to be yours. And they're able to be okay with themselves. Okay? They let go of mistakes. We're going to make mistakes all the time. But they're gifts. We learn from them. We have to learn from them. We should learn from them. And then we got to let it go. The next one? Okay. Give and expect. Give everything. Anything that you have to give, if you have an overabundance of it, give. And expect nothing in return. It's when you have those strings attached, you're going to be really, really, it's going to disserve you. Now, having said that, in Korean American culture, there is always strings attached to something. And that seems to be the relational norm. And it's very unhealthy. If you want to give, that's the choice that you make. Give freely. Give give as much as you want. But that's your choice. You made that decision for you. Don't do that. Just because you give, that doesn't mean somebody owes you. Okay? If you don't want to give, don't give. That's okay too. Okay? That's your decision. But again, you don't expect anything from anybody else. You don't hold grudges. It's really not worth it. People change. Things move. But you do need to talk about it. Talk about it with somebody you trust and process through your feelings of being angry and holding a grudge. There's probably a good reason for it. You need to process through it. Neutralize toxic people. there are a lot of people who tends to be pretty hurtful, pretty painful to be with. We're all on different stages of growth, and, as people. There are some people who are far slower in their growth, and we feel like, oh, this is just too much work. And when you can recognize that, and the only way you recognize that is being really aware of yourself, you can walk away. That's one way to neutralize them. I'm just not going to involve myself in this conversation. It's too toxic. Walk away. Or address it. This conversation that you're initiating is really painful. Like, why would you want to do that? Okay? Find ways to neutralize it as a way to really make sure that you maintain your emotional health. You don't seek perfection. There's nothing in life that's perfect. But there are people who seek after it. It's as if they're looking for that golden grail. They're never going to find it. And it's an exhausting process. And they're just demanding so much of themselves, it makes it really hard. Life tends to be very hard. And you don't have to do that. But again, if you have this problem, talk to somebody about it, because there's a reason. It doesn't just happen out of the blue that you start looking for something perfect. There's a reason. There's something about the way you grew up that instilled this in you. So you need to understand it and make a choice about what you want to do with it. You appreciate what you have. Be grateful. We have something called gratitude list that I encourage people to make. Whatever you feel grateful for, even if it's like, oh, I can breathe, that's a good thing. Remember life is a gift. Be grateful for things. As soon as you forget to be grateful for things, you're going to become very negative, and it's going to send you down the downward spiral. Okay. You appreciate what you have. Okay. You disconnect. That means you take care of you. Remember, in the Confucius culture, everything has to be what's good for the group, and you can stay in this cycle for such a long time where you don't even know how exhausted you are. Everybody needs to disconnect from this big system we call our jobs, our schools, even our friendships. Disconnect and really take care of you. Again, check in with yourself. Ask, how am I doing today? What's going on with me? Really be able to connect back to yourself, rather than constantly connecting to the group. And this is not easy to do. This has to be an exercise that you have to sometimes even force yourself to do, because all of our life, not only because of the Korean American culture, the Confucius norm, but because all of our life, it doesn't matter what country you live in, we are all trained to focus on other people to varying degrees. We always have to figure out what's everybody doing and what am I doing in accordance or against. So we're constantly focused on other people. And if we do it too much, we can lose focus on ourselves. Limit your caffeine intake. Okay, coffee has caffeine, and caffeine is a very powerful chemical. It's amazing why some things are legalized and some things are not. But caffeine can really increase a person's anxiety, and it can make a person feel like they're just sort of suspended in midair, especially when they overdrink it. I mean, gosh, if you go to Starbucks and get a cup of espresso or cappuccino, that's way over the top caffeine for most people. But there are a lot of people who drink 2 or 3 or 4 a day. That's going to wreak havoc in the human system. Okay, so really limit your caffeine intake. Make sure you pay attention to how your body is responding. If after drinking 5 different espressos from Starbucks and you don't feel anything, that's not good. Okay? You have now become that desensitized to it that now your body is filled with caffeine and it's not responding. Something's happening to your nervous system. Okay? And that's one of the things that can happen with caffeine is you just go numb. You don't feel anything. Please get enough sleep. It's the very, very basic human need. If you don't sleep, you're not going to function well. So please try to get some sleep. I know when I was younger too, I stayed up until 2 or 3 in the morning, never thought twice about it, woke up the next day, either really early, 6 or 7 a.m., or really late, like 1 or 2 p.m. It's okay to kind of go through that cycle to learn that that's not really healthy. You don't feel good when you do that. So try to make sure that you get the regular human circadian rhythm, which puts you to sleep, is from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. If you can go to sleep by 10 p.m., I know people are like, that's way too early. I get that, but that really is a natural human circadian rhythm. So if you can put yourself to bed by 10 o'clock and get a pretty good 7 to 8 hours of sleep and wake up by 6 a.m. in the morning, you're doing really well, and you're going to feel much more refreshed. I mean, I almost guarantee it. Stop negative self-talk. I'm so stupid. Even that sets the tone in the brain where it's going to start producing a lot of stress hormones. Okay? Even something simple as, why do I always do that? I'm such a loser. Why? Even that negative self-talk is going to have its repercussions. So try to limit, if you have to do it, try to limit it, but try not to have such negative self-talk with yourself. The last one is you won't let anyone limit your joy. Enjoy life. There is so much to live for. The world is a huge place. There is so much to see. There's so much to do. If you live up to 80 or 90, that's not long enough to really enjoy fully what life has to offer you. It's a great gift. So go out and have fun. Enjoy every minute of it, however you can. Okay? So does that help with the strategy? Okay. Whoever asked the question?
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, I think let's thank Dr. Gill